as you improve, the probability that each improvement will produce a further improvement increases. And so perhaps the downside is the cataclysmic catastrophe that you can engage upon if you reproduce your moral failings. But the upside is that each improvement produces an increment in the probability of the next improvement. And I've seen that. It's a truism among behavioral psychologists. I mean, although they don't generally phrase it that way. If you're a behavioral psychologist, and I am a behavioral psychologist, what you do is you find out what, essentially you help a person establish their aim, then you break down what they're trying to do into attainable units, and you negotiate with them. You say, well, look, they say, I'm not making use of my time very well, spending 3 hours a day playing video games. You say, well, okay, hypothetically, how much time would you like to spend playing video games? And they say, well, I could probably spend an hour a day without it interfering with the rest of my life, which is kind of the issue, right? Because if you play video games, fine, but maybe 3 hours means that you're not doing your homework or something, and that's not a good game. So you say, okay, well, I want to play for an hour a day. It's like, okay, well, can you shift to an hour a day right now? I mean, this is supposed to be an honest conversation. And the person says, no, I've tried that lots of times. Every time I try, I just fail. And so you don't say, well, quit failing, go play 1 hour a day, and the problem will be solved. That's a stupid strategy. You say, okay, well, look, you think about this, and don't agree to do this unless you think you will do it, because otherwise it's just a waste of both of our times. It's like, do you think that you could track how much time you've spent playing video games for 1 week? Don't change anything. Just track it. And they think, yeah, I could probably do that, but I might miss a couple of days. And think, okay, fine. So here's the deal. 5 out of the next 7 days, you just track how much time you spent playing video games. And the person says, I think I can do that. Because that's what you want them to say. You want them to succeed at the improvement. It's not much of an improvement, but it's something, right? Then they come back and they say, well, yeah, I was playing about 4 hours a day. And so you say, okay, well, fine, good work, man. You got it tracked. Now we know the parameters of your problem. It's actually a little worse than you thought, but at least you had enough sense to measure it. We know where you're at. Okay, do you think you could cut that down to 3.5 hours every day? And the person thinks, no, I'm pretty weak-willed. I don't think I can manage that. You say, well, how about this? Do you think that 2 of the next 7 days you can only play for 3 hours? You think you can manage that? And you're not cynical about this. You're not insulting the person, any of that. It's like, because you don't care. All you care is that they make some incremental movement towards their goal. And the person thinks about that if they have any sense, and they take their weakness into account, and they think, I think I could probably do that. And then they come back the next week, and they say, I managed to spend 3 hours a day playing video games for 3 days, and the rest were 4 hours. And you say, good work, man. You've just got rid of 12.5% of your problem. You're 1/8 of the way to fixing it in 1 week. And, the person isn't going to be all that thrilled with themselves because they don't do the arithmetic, and they don't do the projection. They think, well, I'm still pretty damn useless. I'm playing 25 hours worth of video games a week. It's nothing to pat myself on the back for. It's like, yes, it is. It's a marked, measurable improvement, and it's a move in the right direction. And then you say, okay, well, on the days you succeeded, how did you manage to succeed? And is there a way that you could do it for 4 days next week? How about that? Or maybe you could even try 5 days. You think you could do that? And then you also tell the person, look, the other thing you got to understand is you're not going to improve like this. You're going to improve like this. So some weeks you're going to come back and say, geez, I backslid completely and I played for 4 hours a day for 7 days. But it doesn't matter, because that doesn't mean you failed. It just means that you slid back. You want to calculate it over a month or something like that. And, generally speaking, a month later, the person's down to something like 2 hours a day, and you've figured out ways of filling their time in with something productive otherwise, and they're on their way. And the general consequence of that is that every time they manage an accomplishment, they get a little stronger in character, they get a little bit more confident in their ability, they get a little bit less racked with self-disgust, they get a little bit more hopeful about the future, and they get more confident that they can make another change. And if you're patient, and you have to be patient with yourself that way, it's like you reward those incremental improvements and you don't get all cynical about them. And you think, okay, just imagine what would happen if you kept doing that every week for 10 years. And the answer to that is things would be so much better for you that you can't even imagine. Life is suffering. Right. Indisputable. What do you do about that? You voluntarily accept it and then strive to overcome the suffering that's a consequence of that. And you do that for you, and you do that in a way that makes it better for other people. And then that works. And one question might be, well, how well does it work? And the answer is, the only way that you can find out is by trying it. That's it. That's the existential element of it. The proof is to be derived by the incarnation of the attitude in your own life. No one can tell you how it will work for you. It's the thing that your destiny is to discover that. And you have to make the decisions to begin with. It's like, because you can't do this without commitment. You have to commit to it first. That's the act of faith that Kierkegaard was so insistent upon. You have to say, I'm going to act as if being is good. I'm going to act as if truth is the pathway to enlightenment. I'm going to act as if I should pursue the deepest meaning possible in my life. And there's reasons to do none of those. They're real reasons. So it's really a decision. But you can't find out what the consequence of the decision is unless you make the decision. I think the same thing happens when you get married, by the way. It's that if you think you might leave, you're not married. And then you think, well, the marriage didn't succeed. It's like, well, maybe you were never married. Because the rule is, you don't get to leave. And there's a reason for that rule. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't situations where there should be exceptions made for that. That's not the point. The point is that there's some games you don't get to play unless you're all in. And the other thing that's so interesting about being alive is that you're all in. No matter what you do, you're all in. This is going to kill you. So I think you might as well play the most magnificent game you can while you're waiting. Because do you have anything better to do? Really? Why not pick the best thing possible that you could do? Why not do that? Maybe you could justify your wretched existence to yourself that way. I think you could. That's what it looks like. People find such meaning in the responsibilities they adopt, it stops making them ask questions about what life is for. If you have a newborn child, for example, like unless you're really in a bad way, psychotically depressed, or maybe your personality really needs some retooling, you stop thinking about anything but ensuring that that baby is doing well. And if someone comes along and asks you an existential question about your commitment to that, the right response is, why are you asking me such stupid questions when this is manifesting itself right in front of your eyes? Like, how blind can you be? That isn't a time for questions about the meaning of life. The answer is right in front of you. And if you can't see it, it's not because life has no meaning, it's because you're blind. I mean, that's what the image of the Virgin Mother and the child is all about. It's like, what's the answer to the meaning of life? Here's an answer. It's like, well, I'm going to criticize that. Well, go right ahead. It's like what you're like a what do you call that? A termite gnawing on a temple. There's no utility in that sort of criticism. It's blindness. And it's the same thing with regards to the path of the hero. It's like it glistens in front of you and you can criticize it. It's like, fine. Put the cart before the horse and see how far you get. And you hear people like Joseph Campbell say things like, follow your bliss, and so that sounds pretty easy. You want to develop your personality, just do what you love. It's a corruption of Carl Jung's thinking, because Jung would say, well, follow what you're interested in, it'll take you somewhere you really don't want to go, and then maybe you'll learn something. So, and that's a whole different proposition. So, human beings, if you talk about a human being, you tend to use something that's like a story.
And when you recount your own being, you tend to use something like a story, and that sort of begs the question, does that mean in fact that your experience is either a story or something like a story? One of the things Jung said, I really like this, is you should figure out which story you're living, because you're living a story, and it might be a tragedy. And so, you want to find out, because if it's a tragedy, you don't come to a very good end. Another thing Jung said was, this is also worth thinking about, people don't have ideas. Ideas have people. And so what Jung would say is that if you're living out a tragedy, the tragedy has you. You don't have it. And if you can figure out what the tragedy is that has you in its grip, then you have a fighting chance of escaping from it into a more pleasing plot. But it's no easy thing. So if you're one of those people to whom the same terrible thing keeps happening over and over, after the third time, approximately, you might ask yourself, is this the world or is this me?